In this video, I'll show you how to create a 3D title that disintegrates into tiny particles using DaVinci Resolve. Here we are in the Edit page. First thing we'll do is create a fusion composition. In the Media pool, I'll right-click and select New Fusion Composition. I'll name it 3D Title and set the duration to 8 seconds. I'll drag it into the timeline, and with the playhead over it, head into Fusion. As you can see, all we have is a Media Out node. This is the endpoint of the Fusion composition, containing the final output that's displayed on the Edit page. We'll begin by adding a Text 3D node. I'll grab its icon in the Node Editor toolbar. Then a Merge 3D node. The Text 3D node is selected, so I can just click its icon in the toolbar. And a Renderer 3D node. I'll attach the Renderer 3D node to the Media Out node. And that's a bare bones 3D composition. We'll add some bells and whistles as we go along. I'll select the Text 3D node and enter the text of the title in the inspector. And I'll change the font to PT Sans Caption. The title is too big for the screen, but that's not a problem as we'll be using a 3D camera to frame the shot. We'll add that right now. I'll select the Merge 3D node and add a Camera 3D node by clicking its icon in the toolbar. Media Out, which is what's being shown in Viewer 2, is now displaying what the camera is seeing, which is nothing at the moment. I'll load the Merge 3D node into Viewer 1 by selecting it and pressing 1 on my keyboard. There's the title and camera. I'll change the perspective to top by right-clicking on Perspective in the lower right of Viewer 1. I'll click on the Text 3D node to select it. Viewer 1 shows the position of the title and camera in 3D space. The camera is in the same spot as the title and is looking behind it, which explains why Viewer 2 is blank. I'll select the camera node and, in Viewer 1, grab the blue arrow with the mouse and pull the camera back. If you're not seeing the same controls, make sure this icon is highlighted in the upper left of Viewer 1. The title is partially visible in Viewer 2. I'll click on the text node so you can see the position of the title relative to the camera in Viewer 1. Holding down the Command key, Control key in Windows, I'll use the middle mouse wheel to zoom out Viewer 1. I'll select the Camera 3D node and pull the camera back a bit more. To further adjust the camera's position, I'll click on the Transform tab in the inspector. Before doing anything, I'll change the view in Viewer 1 back to perspective. In the inspector, I'll place a check mark in Use Target. A target has appeared in Viewer 1. I'll use the Y parameter under the Target section to raise the target so it's halfway up the letter I, smack dab in the middle of the title. Now, no matter how we adjust the parameters in the Translation section, the camera will always be pointed at the title, which is the target. Double-clicking on a parameter's label resets its value. Using Viewer 2 as my guide, I'll adjust the Z parameter under Translation to pull the camera back. Later on, we'll animate the camera so it's moving around. Now let's refine the title's appearance. Chrome-plated letters would make for a cool effect. For that, we'll use a shader node, but first we need to add a Replace Material 3D node right after the text node. I'll select the text node and press Shift Spacebar to bring up the Select Tool dialog. In the field at the bottom, I'll begin typing Replace Material 3D. It's selected in the list, so I'll click the Add button to insert it into the node tree. This step is optional, by the way. You don't need to add a shader if you don't want to. Now I'll open the Effects library and under Templates, and then Fusion, I'll select the Shaders category. There is plenty of shaders to choose from. I'll use the Chrome shader. I'll connect it to the Replace Material 3D node's green input. I'll close the effects library to make more room. The title's appearance has changed in Viewer 1. It's changed in Viewer 2 as well, but the effect is subtle and hard to see. That's because we haven't added any lighting. We'll do that later. Let's continue refining the appearance of the title. This is 3D, so our title should have depth as well as height and width. Holding down Shift and using the middle mouse wheel, I'll adjust the perspective in Viewer 1 so we're looking at the title from a side angle. You can also use the mouse wheel on its own to move up and down and from side to side. I'll select the text node, and in the inspector, I'll expand the extrusion section. I'll begin by adjusting extrusion depth. I'll set it to about 0.041. Now we're getting a 3D appearance. I'll adjust the bevel depth and width parameters. I'll set depth to about 0.0173 and width to about 0.015. This creates another surface around the edges. Let's have a look at it in Viewer 1. Again, I'll hold down Shift while using the middle mouse wheel. I'll restore the default view in Viewer 1 by right-clicking on Perspective in the bottom right, selecting Settings, then Reset Defaults. Before we add lighting, let's add a background. I'll select the Renderer 3D node and add a regular merge node by clicking its icon in the toolbar. I'll disconnect the Renderer 3D node and reconnect it to the green foreground input. And I'll grab a background node from the toolbar and attach it to the yellow background input. The default black background will do. Okay, let's add lighting. In order to see lights, they need to be enabled. To do that, we'll select the Renderer 3D node and put a check mark in Enable Lighting in the inspector. Viewer 2 has gone dark because we haven't set up any lighting. We'll add a spotlight. I'll select the Merge 3D node and add a spotlight node. Viewer 2 is still dark. This is the same issue we had with the camera. It's because the light is in the same place as the title and is lighting the area behind it. I'll change the perspective in Viewer 1 to top and pull the spotlight back. I'll switch the view back to perspective to help me set up the target. I'll select the Transform tab in the inspector and place a check mark in Use Target. As with the camera, I'll position the target halfway up the letter I. The target will keep the spotlight pointed at the title. I'll switch the perspective back to top in Viewer 1. Holding down Command, Control, and Windows, I'll use the middle mouse wheel to zoom out. Using the on-screen controls, I'll position the light. As I'm doing so, I'm using Viewer 2 as a guide. The Media Out node is loaded into Viewer 2, so it's displaying the final result. See this white dot on the Media Out node? That means it's loaded in Viewer 2. If it were loaded in Viewer 1, the dot on the left would be white. A node can be loaded into both viewers simultaneously, in which case both dots would be white. I'll click on the Controls tab in the inspector and expand the cone angle and lower the intensity setting. I'll adjust its position. Let's add a second spotlight. Again, first select the Merge 3D node. I'll pull it back. I'll set up the target for this light too by switching to perspective view. I'll switch the perspective back to top and position the light. Again, using Viewer 2 as a guide. I'll expand the cone angle and adjust the intensity. I'll adjust its position again. Now we'll add an ambient light. It's different from a spotlight in that it's not directional. It fills the entire scene with a uniform light, so it's an easy light to use. I'll select the Merge 3D node and press Shift Spacebar to insert an ambient light node. I'll change its color in the inspector and adjust its intensity. This adds just a tiny bit of warmth. Let's spread the title out a bit. I'll select the text node and adjust tracking. I'll adjust the spotlights. Now let's animate the camera. It'll be a two-part animation. I'll position the playhead on frame 80 by clicking on the time ruler. This is where the first part of the animation will end. I'll select the camera node and pull the camera back a bit more by adjusting the Z parameter of the translation group in the inspector. This is what we'll see at the end of the first part of the animation. I'll right-click on Translation and select Animate Translate Group. And I'll do the same for the rotation group. That's keyframed all the parameters in the translation and rotation groups. Now I'll move the playhead to the first frame by pressing Command left arrow, Control left arrow in Windows. We'll begin the camera animation here. I'll zoom out Viewer 1 to reveal the camera. I'll position it using the on-screen controls. When the clip begins, I want the camera right up against the first letter. I'll rotate the camera by setting the Z parameter under rotation to -90. Let's play it. Pretty good. So that's the first part. For the second and last part of the animation, we'll have it continue to very slowly pull back or zoom out. I'll move to the end of the clip by pressing Command right arrow, Control right arrow in Windows. And I'll adjust the Z parameter under translation to pull the camera out a bit more, but not by very much. We want this to be a very slow pull-out. To refine the animation, let's add easing. Easing just means that the animation will begin slowly, speed up, then slow down as it ends. Ease in and out, to use the jargon. I'll open the Spline Editor. I'll place a check mark in the Camera 3D 1 parameter in the header to enable the splines of each of its keyframed parameters. I'll click Zoom to fit. Now I'll select all the points by clicking the Select All icon on the toolbar, and then click the Smooth icon. There we go. I'll close the Spline Editor. I covered the Spline Editor in detail in my syncing animation with sound video. I'll leave a link in the description. To improve playback performance, I'll set timeline playback resolution on the playback menu to half. Let's play it back. I'll move to the first frame by pressing Command left arrow, Control left arrow in Windows. Looking good. Let's add a twinkling light effect. We can do that with a raise node. It's a 2D node, so we'll add it after the renderer 3D node. The renderer 3D node outputs a 2D image. First thing I'll do is adjust the weight. I'll adjust decay as well. This determines the length of the light rays or how quickly or slowly they decay or fade out. And I'll adjust exposure. We can grab this thingamajig in Viewer 2 to position the rays light source. The center XY parameter pair in the inspector can also be used to move it around. Let's do something different for this. I'll right-click on the center label and select Modify with Perturb. This will randomly change the position of the light source. Let's play the clip. Although it's random, we do have some control. In the inspector, I'll click on the Modifiers tab at the top. I'll adjust the random seed parameter. Changing this will cause the light source to follow a different pattern. And I'll adjust the X and Y scale parameters to constrain the movement of the light source. I'll set the Y scale to 0 so the light source only moves from side to side over the title. And I'll adjust the X scale. This controls the horizontal or side-to-side movement of the light source. Let's see how that looks. If you don't like how it looks, you can adjust the random seed to get a different result, or just click the Reseed button. And for complete control, you can forego modifying with Perturb and keyframe the center XY parameter pair. Now to have the title disintegrate into tiny particles, we'll make use of Resolve's particle system, a collection of nodes beginning with a small letter P. I'll deselect all the nodes by clicking in an empty area and add a P image emitter node. It converts a 2D image into particles. I'll connect the raise node to it. And I'll connect the P render node to the P image emitter node by clicking its icon in the toolbar. At a minimum, for a particle system, you need an emitter node, either P emitter or P image emitter, and a particle renderer node, P render. All other particle nodes must be inserted in between these two nodes. I'll insert another merge node after the raise node. Holding down the Shift key, I'll drag it over the pipe and, when it turns green and blue, release it. Now we just need to connect the P render node to the green foreground input of the merge node. I'll load the P-render node into Viewer 1 by pressing 1. Notice that there's now 2 pipes coming out of the raise node. This means we have 2 instances of the title running in parallel. One of these instances will be converted into particles. First, let's change the appearance of the particles. I'll select the P-image emitter node and click on the Style tab in the inspector. I'll change style to blob. Next, I'll expand the size control section and increase size. I'll set it to around 0.425. I'll also increase size variance. This will cause some particles to be bigger and others smaller. I'll set it to about 0.19. Now I'll click the Controls tab and lower the X and Y density parameters so the particles are less densely packed. I'll set both to about 0.425. And to get a random result, I'll set random seed by clicking the Reseed button. To get the particles to move, they need velocity. The velocity section allows us to control how fast the particles move, as well as the angle of their movement. I'll expand it. I'll increase velocity slightly to about 0.079. I'll also raise velocity variance to about 0.173. Like with size, this varies the velocity of the particles, so they won't all be moving at the same speed. In the viewers, you can see that the particles are moving to the right. Their angle of movement can be changed. I'll set angle to 180. The particles are now moving to the left. I'll set angle variance to 70 to spread the particles out. Every time a change is made to a particle node, the P-render node will render out the result. How long this takes will depend on your system and the makeup of the fusion composition. I'll set angle Z to 90 to make the particles move outward towards the camera. And I'll set angle Z variance to 75. All right, that looks good. The particles are all spread out. Let's play it and see what it looks like. Notice how the particles disappear suddenly? That's because their lifespan is set to 100 frames, and our clip is 191 frames. We'll adjust their lifespan later. The title should appear normally at first, and then, after a time, disintegrate. Right now, both things are happening at the same time, so how to make one happen after the other? First, we have to pick a frame where we want the disintegration to begin. Let's use frame 80, where the first part of the camera animation ends. I'll move the playhead there by clicking on the time ruler. At this frame, we'll do two things. We'll activate the P-render node, which renders the particles, bringing them to life, so to speak, and we'll switch out the regular title so it's no longer visible. To activate the P-render node at frame 80, I'll select it and, under Global In-Out, I'll type 80 in the field on the left. To switch out the regular or non-disintegrating title, we'll use a dissolve node. This lets us switch between foreground and background. I'll deselect all the nodes and add it in. I'll disconnect the raise node from the merge node and connect it to the yellow background input of the dissolve node. And I'll connect the P-render node to its green foreground input. We no longer need the merge node, so I'll delete it and connect the dissolve node to the green foreground input of the first merge node we added. Now, with the dissolve node selected, I'll move the slider all the way to the left so only the background stream is visible. This is the regular non-disintegrating title that was connected to the yellow background input. Notice how the particles in Viewer 2 have disappeared. I'll keyframe the field. I'll move ahead 2 frames by pressing the right arrow key on my keyboard twice and move the slider all the way to the right so only the foreground is visible. This is the particle stream. That's the output of the pre-render node that we connected to the green foreground input of the dissolve node. Now, the particles in Vera 2 are visible, and the regular title has disappeared. Let's play it from the beginning. It's taking shape. Let's give the particles some rotation by adding a p-vortex node. I'll open the effects library. Under Tools, Open FX, I'll select Particles. All the particle nodes are here. I'll grab a p-vortex node. I'll make some room. Holding down Shift, I'll insert it after the p-image emitter node. I'll close the effects library to make more room and play the clip. It's spinning too quickly and the area of rotation is too small. In the inspector, I'll increase its size to about 0.626. And I'll reduce its strength and power. Let's play it now. That's more like it. Particles can be made to change color over time. I'll select the p-image emitter node and click on the Style tab in the inspector. I'll expand the color control section, then the color over life controls. The color swatch represents the lifespan of a particle. The left side represents its birth and the right its death. I'll click in the middle of the swatch, middle age. This should create a tiny triangle. I'll change the color to dark purple. I'll click again at the end and set the color to pale yellow. The particles should start off normally, turn purple, then yellow. Let's play the clip. We can also control the size of particles over their lifetime. Let's have them become smaller as they age. Under Size Control, I'll adjust the size over life graph. Let's see how that looks. Hard to tell, but we'll take Resolve's word for it. Now let's adjust the lifespan of the particles so they last till the end of the clip. I'll click on the Controls tab. I'll set lifespan to 90 and adjust lifespan variance so that not every particle has the same lifespan. I'll set it to 46. The clip's 191 frames in total, and the particles kick in at frame 80, so with a high enough variance, some particles should still be around at the end. As a final touch, let's have the particles fade away towards the end of the clip. I'll click the Style tab and expand Fade Controls at the bottom, and set the Out field to 0.85. Let's go to the Edit page and play back full screen. Before playing it back, I'll set timeline playback resolution back to full. I'll also enable render caching by selecting Render Cache Smart from the playback menu. This tells Resolve to automatically render any processor-intensive clips in the background. When the red line above the clip is entirely blue, rendering is complete and the clip will play back in real time. Making any changes will cause the clip to be rendered again. I'll enable looped playback by clicking this button and move to the beginning of the timeline by pressing Function left arrow. In Windows, you can just press the Home key. The line's completely blue. I'll press Command F, Control F in Windows to enter full screen and play it back. So that's a basic 3D title framework you can use as a starting point for your own creations. Thank you for watching.